All right, we're going to start right now. So everyone on the web, welcome to our session, and everyone in the room, thank you for coming. I'm Ben Choder. I'm going to act as the moderator today. Our guests to my left are going to be doing most of the presentation, but there's a couple things we want everyone to know. Throughout the program, we want to make this interactive. If you have any questions, just stand up and we'll take your questions. We don't want to sit here and sort of preach to you. We want you to ask questions. We want to make this really interactive. But we have like 2 questions before we get into the program. The first question is, how many people in this room are from PCMA and are now attending the Virtual Edge conference? All right, so I'm going to guess about 30%, 40%? Oh, maybe more? All right.
About 50%. Yeah.
About 50%, so that's pretty cool. So you're going to learn a lot, and the people here for Virtual Edge, hopefully you're going to learn a lot as well. And my next question is, how many people in the room have run a hybrid event of any kind? All right, so I see like 1. How many have attended as a participant a hybrid event? All right, so that's pretty cool. And then the last piece of clarification, throughout the presentation, our 2 guests used the word satellite a lot. And I just want to give a clarification with satellite in this term. A satellite broadcast is remote locations. It's not sending it up to a bird and then bringing it down as a downlink. So we just want to clarify that. And without any further ado, I want to introduce the panel. Sam Smith to the end, and Danette Veal is next to me. Their bios and their information are all reachable. And we're also going to take questions from the web. And remember, throughout their presentation, any questions you have, please ask. And yep.
Real quick, and so for everyone online, please tweet to #VES120W any of your questions, and then Michelle here will pick those up for you and ask them on your behalf.
And we're going to try to get to every question that we can.
Okay, so we kept it slide light. I have 3 seg slides and 3 actual slides. So we're going to get started. What we're here to talk about today is kind of the hybrid trends. Where do we see hybrid events going insofar as interaction and engagement as well as models? So the first trend I'm going to talk about is really about integrated gaming, and this being used to actually drive registration and also drive attendee engagement, and that is attendee engagement not just for your virtual audience but your physical audience, being able to leverage games to kind of bridge the gap between those 2 audiences and spur competition, whether they're attending physically and or virtually. So I have some examples here. I was recently on the Cisco Live Virtual team. I made a changeover to the GSX team. But both of those instances use gaming very rigorously in order to engage the attendees. What you're seeing up here are some examples of the games that were run during the last Cisco Live US event. Our goal with these games, again, was to create a fun activity that would have some light education on Cisco, but not clubbing over the head education on Cisco, if you will, but that moved beyond just the traditional show prize of, you know, if you go into a booth, you get so many points. If you watch a session, you get so many points. You get into so many point levels, and then you get, you know, eligible for a prize. We wanted to have something that was a little bit more like a flash mini game, if you will. And so we developed our jargon jumble, which was using Cisco acronyms and technology terms like DMVPN or CMNP and things that I technically don't even really know what they stand for. But that's okay because I'm not on the technical side at Cisco. I'm in marketing. And we also developed our Colossal Cranium Challenge. Both of these games, again, the Cranium Challenge focused on Cisco history, but also pop kind of culture references at key points during Cisco's history as well. We released these games pre the actual hybrid event for the US event. They were a way for us to entice the audience that was entitled to that virtual experience as part of their physical package, as well as those net new virtual registrants in our existing virtual database to get in and start to get acclimated with the environment if they hadn't experienced it before. Have a little bit of fun before they came to the event, start to compete for some prizes, and get their eyeballs on things like agendas and scheduling tools, etc.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Were they able to go online and see where they ranked at all times? So.
Yep, definitely had a leaderboard, and if you look on here, there are some stats. There is, for the Jargon Jumble players, there was around 39% or so of those folks who, yeah, this is doing some very strange things with the slides. So, from a text perspective, but the Colossal Cranium Challenge players, we had 815 individuals actually wound up engaging in that game. We had about 4,000 online attendees and around 10,000 or so physical event attendees who were able to participate in this activity. And you had 80% or so who played that game many, many times in order to try and get their score up. And the Jargon Jumble was another good example. So we definitely we held some tweet ups and also some kind of tweet chats around the gaming, and what we had were a lot of individuals who said that they were going in, looking at the leaderboards, seeing that they had fallen out of the top 12 and you needed to be in the top 12 in order to get the prize, and going in and trying to up level their score at that point in time. We did still have a show prize because that's just kind of driving overall engagement. We also ran what we call our best blogger submissions. This is using a blogging tool, and we incentivize people to actually contribute to the conversation, and based off of views and recommends, they would be eligible for, again, another prize there. I think the thing that was key on this one is that we used social media to really promote the games prior to event, to have a sizzle factor or something that we could put out there in that space that would entice them to get engaged with the experience, and we saw hundreds of net new registrants via that source. So gaming did help to drive some awareness of the hybrid activity that we're having and bring in a net new audience. So I think when we talk about the trend, what we're going to start to see is just a lot more use of either mini game concepts or more complex game concepts that are either individually played or played via teams that are directly integrated into the environment. We had some goals with our games last year that we weren't able to achieve that I'd like to see be pushed further in the future, and one of those was really the ability for them to be able to play it via a mobile device. So again, those physical attendees weren't locked to having that laptop. They could play it at any time, and we also wanted to be able to have mini games or sample games that could go out directly into those social media channels. So instead of talking about, we've got this cool Colossal Cranium Challenge game, come on in and do it, they could get a little bit of a taste with a couple questions. And that game was very much like the You Don't Know Jack if you're aware of that game, but it has a really funny voiceover script that happens with it that kind of carefully prods and I wouldn't say mocks, but does some interesting jokes as they're actually leading the person through the gaming experience. Angie Smith from the GSX group will talk a bit more about gaming tomorrow as relates to the GSX experience. It's our global sales experience for our internal sales organization. But games have been instrumental in that one as well, and there have been some much more complex game examples that have been deployed there with the alternate reality games, the ARGs. So I guess, just to keep it light here on the presentation, the trend that we're talking about really is seeing that games are going to become a way from an integration perspective to really drive that engagement, but they're also going to be a way to add some sizzle and punch into some of the social media broadcasts that you're doing to entice people to start engaging with your virtual experience.
Has anyone in the room who has attended a hybrid played a game before they enter in the room, besides everyone on the panel? All right, so no. Very interesting. And can I ask a question about gaming? Do you think it's going to go down the road where right now I'm playing, but do you think it's going to be live multiplayer? So it's going to, while the show's going on, I'm competing with 50, 100, 1,000 people simultaneously?
And Angie, there's an example from GSX last year. It wasn't multiplayer and so the 50-100, but it was definitely a Sudoku game that in order to actually engage in the game, you had to have somebody on the other side. So it did force some collaboration, and you saw some interesting chats happening, more social connections happening between those Salesforce organizations. With this one, you were incentivized to join a team, but you weren't playing as a team per se. You got different questions presented to you, and your team score would be able to be combined and get you higher in the ranks, and it added to your individual score with kind of a bonus, if you will. Question?
Are we on? Yes. Hi. What about the demographics of the people you're trying to reach with gaming? Does it skew, younger to older? And where does gaming fit in the business-to-business world where some of the people who are attending this meeting have meetings that are very business focused, so gaming may be somewhat of a questionable way to get them in. I'm wondering if you've done anything.
I don't think that I haven't specific. From a demographic perspective, you definitely do want to look at your demographic, and you also want to look at the attendee type that you have coming in, obviously. With the Cisco Live example here, that is a user conference for Cisco that's put on for network engineers, systems engineers, et cetera, and the average age is 30 to 50-ish or so. So we wanted to keep the games pretty simple, pretty straightforward, easy for them to execute. There's also some legal constraints on how long can the game be. You have to go through some of those dances. But I do think that from a B2B perspective, that sometimes gaming gets a bad rap with it can be viewed as you're wasting time, you're not doing something that's productive at that point. And there are ways to script games and to leverage games to actually educate on whether it's engagement scenarios that you want those individuals to take away from a training perspective, or whether it's product awareness that you want them to be able to disseminate down, that can be presented in a game fashion, which is, there's a lot of research out there that shows that people learn very, very well within gaming environments, and they take in and they saturate that information in a really great way.
But you need to know your audience too, because if this was an audience of doctors, I don't think gaming would be the ideal way. But if you're talking about technologists, I mean, it's what they do when they're on their own anyway.
Well, and I have an example a little later. We used business games, video-based business games, where we presented people with scenarios, and those were in the face-to-face audience, as well as at the satellites, as well as the remote attendees. They were presented with a scenario, and they were asked to make a decision, and it was a collaborative game. So then, after you made individual decisions, you then had to talk it over with your group, and then those results built up, and at the end of the day, all of the groups had to decide what's the best course of action, and that's the scenario that was played out. And there were videos for all scenarios, and what happened in that scenario, that game, is that the move you made or the decision you made at the very beginning could have impacted the entire outcome, but you didn't know that until 4 moves later.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
lots of different things you can do with games.
Also looking at the demographic insofar as global distribution, right? So if you have a more US-based audience, you can make the games maybe have a little bit more use of colloquialisms and things that are more U.S. centralized. This was a global audience that came into this platform, and those top bullets there represent 67 countries participating or 43 countries participating. So we found with this lighter format, with things being verbally said as well as written onto the page, and keeping them in somewhat familiar formats like that jargon jumble and the word connect, that it crossed the barriers, if you will, of gaming across a global audience. Trend 2, live syndication. So this is about how you can approach getting key messaging out beyond the virtual platform wall or the virtual event wall to drive awareness of the overall activity that's happening with those virtual events. And I'll give some more examples here. So we leveraged Ustream for this last year's US event. And we strategically chose some of our high-level, caliber speakers like a John Chambers, our CEO, or Padmasree Warrior, our CTO. And we live broadcasted those keynote sessions that were taking place, not only into the virtual event platform, but also out via the Ustream platform, embedded into our own CiscoLive.com homepage, into our Facebook fan pages, into blogs, as well as obviously a Ustream channel page. We did that very strategically because one of the key things we're trying to do with that event is get that high-level messaging that Cisco is putting out there to as many individuals as want to experience it, and understood from the previous year that while this may impact the total attendance that we might have in that virtual event experience, the individuals who would opt for the virtual event experience would be more qualified. They would be more of the target audience that we were really trying to get into that type of format. And therefore it wouldn't dilute some numbers from a sponsorship activity perspective. If you got an extra 2,000 or 3,000 people who decide I'll go through the guest registration just so I can watch the keynote and bug out, it dilutes the overall percentage of traffic down to that sponsor booth. But we also recognize that there was going to be many individuals who may not even be aware of the virtual extension of Cisco Live, who were our target audience, who would see them via this means. They may be reading the Cisco blogs. They may be out on that fan page. So again, we saw hundreds of net new registrants via this vehicle, and we got some carefully kind of banner ad placement onto these various spaces, and obviously worked very closely with our marketing team. Stacey Clark's here in the audience, leads that team, to make sure we put it into key vehicles that we knew that our net audience was already going to be going to. And the peak, day 2, we had around 30,000 or so unique viewers on that day of that content. So we felt like that was in a 25-minute average viewing rate, which for a Ustream audience, when it's not a Justin Bieber or I think Denise Richards is doing a chat today, is pretty good. So I think that when we look at trend 2 here, it's going to be looking at that infrastructure you put in place to do that type of broadcast and selectively choosing broadcasts to go potentially outside of your virtual event wall into some of your key marketing vehicles to drive awareness not only of the physical event messaging, but that virtual event activity that's taking place in conjunction.
Right, because build it and they will come just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So reach them where they want to be reached. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Are there any questions on the net? Not yet.
Okay. Trend 3, satellite events. So as Ben alluded to earlier, this is not about there's something up in space that I'm beaming out messaging to. This is around looking at remote locations that are not necessarily, so with the Cisco Live example, for example, there are 3, this is trend 3. Sorry, I'm just getting derailed because the text went a little crazy on these slides apparently. Rejected. Yep.
There is a question
Okay.
about gaming. Did you already think about game competitions between live, the physical audience, and the remote attendees? Or is it remote only? I think, Sam, you addressed that a little bit, but is that a dynamic that is hoped for, and will that do anything to drive engagement around your virtual events?
Our goal with gaming was to have the competition be any attendee, whether they were physically going to the event or they were virtually attending the event, to do a blend of that audience to help them, especially with the team concept, start to make connections maybe outside of the known groups that they had. And for example, we had teams that were formed around like, AT&T, around corporations, where there were definitely individuals participating in that team format who were able to they got the golden ticket that year. It was their turn to go, but their other teammates maybe didn't get the golden ticket. And so they had the ability to kind of blend together via that experience.
There's another comment about a Twitter follower who's in the government sector. They have to be careful not to appear to engage in frivolous pursuits. Games would be a tough sell. Maybe you need to call it something else besides games.
Yeah, no, you could certainly look at how you want to brand that concept, if you will. I mean, it could be interactive engagement. There are other ways to term it other than gaming, for sure. And I think, I definitely think that there is a place, especially with the scenarios that Sam was speaking to earlier, where the ability, if you take the gaming out of the naming of what the activity you're doing, but understand that that's kind of the underpinning or the format that you're trying to replicate in some way, shape, or form out to that audience. Sam, anything you want to add?
No, I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, in a lot of different sectors, you might use one word here and it's just acceptable and in fact it's preferred, but then you go to another one and it's the taboo term. And so I can see how gaming might look that way in government, but I definitely know that there are government organizations that are using different types of gaming tools. They just might not call it games or publicize it outside of their organization.
Well, most online training programs have some sort of game or
Simulation.
Yeah, simulation's
right?
a game, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So satellite event experience again. So with the Cisco Live, we have the physical large activity that takes place in various locations. It'll be in Mandalay Bay. If anybody here is a system engineer, you can go. No, I'm just kidding. And then we have our virtual extension. So what we identified a need for last year was there were strategic accounts from some of our larger service providers, as well as a group within our central sales area, if you will, and their commercial groups or smaller companies that were going through some challenges with educating some customers on new technologies they either wanted them to adopt or getting them the information they needed on the technologies they were already kind of in the funnel, if you will. So what they requested was the ability to leverage, again, that infrastructure you're putting in place for that virtual experience and create remote sales office satellite events, however you want to term it, where they could bring a smaller group of customers together into that space. And on average, they were anywhere from 15 to 30 customers who would attend these, 1 to 3 days, depending on the entity, the group that was actually scheduling and doing the format and inviting their customers to the space. You can see some stats here. We had about 9. This was a very pilot program, if you will, very kind of organically mushroomed. As I have said before, maybe a little bit out of control at first, but then it dialed back, which was a good thing while we were getting our feet into this water. Some of the companies that participated were like AT&T, Time Warner, Scottrade, Blue Shield, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I think that there's a twofold here. What was that customer experience? Because for some of them, maybe it's not their year to go to the Cisco Live conference. They've been before and they're kind of missing that experience. But for many of them, they're new to the company and they've never been to a Cisco Live, so they don't know the caliber of the content, et cetera, that's going to be presented to them. So this gave the sales group, this is the other side of the audience, it gave them a great opportunity to do a nurturing event and a very intimate, hands-on experience. And the scores from the attendees was 4.34 from a satisfaction perspective, but more importantly, that 80% that's not followed by any text right there, 80% said they were more likely to either buy or recommend product based off of having attended that event. So it definitely achieved the sales and the account manager folks who are working on this format achieved their goals with being able to get that information. There's such a huge wealth of knowledge that gets distributed at that user conference specifically. There's over 400 sessions presented on site. And in the virtual experience, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sessions available. So also for the sales group, what it allowed them to do is if I want to specifically speak to these people about IPv6, I have a huge category I can pull from. Then I can look at the live broadcast. I can deal with time zone challenges. Maybe they're on the East Coast and the keynote's not going to really kick off until 11 o'clock their time. That's fine. Here's a 90-minute session on IPv6 deployment, and then I can bring in a local partner, and they could create these very intimate experiences for their customers.
This is one of my 3 favorite trends where I think 2011 is going, because I think the 2 biggest things you get out of doing this is, one, if you're having an event and you're broadcasting it, people can still watch at home. But more importantly, you get the group involved. And it's not just for reaching customers. National sales meetings where you're not having it anymore, you're not bringing 2,000 people to a location, you now get to get them involved. And as you can see in the pictures, they're also participating. So we're going to broadcast not only out, you're going to broadcast in. So it's not just, don't think one way, it's not a one-way medium. It's now I can actually switch and go live to Atlanta, or I can switch and go live to Michigan, and they feel like they're part of it.
Yeah, we had them all do a shout out during the opening keynote for John, so they all got to kind of speak back to the Vegas audience. And that sales office, satellite experience you're speaking to, that's her presentation in a nutshell, where she talks about taking a sales, meeting out to 1,100 different conference rooms around the globe.
You have testimonials too.
And then, people, they worked. This is some of the customer testimonials, and down on the bottom, Scott Wilson is one of our Cisco account managers who is running the Grand Rapids event. Obviously, from a syndication perspective, love that quote, gave that one to John. So video, it kept my attention the whole time. Maybe it is the future. And from the jargon jumble, that's one of the individuals. I think he played about 12 to 15 times over the course of that game's release, and it was available for about a 2 to 3 week period. So he was, and yes, he won a Flip Slide HD. He definitely got in that top 12. So it worked, and we got the good feedback from the attendees accordingly.
Very cool. I'm going to turn it in a little bit different direction. We're going to still talk about trends, but the event that I'm going to use as my baseline for the case, or for what we're going to use against the trends, is an event called Event Camp Twin Cities. And so, and that was an event that was held just last September. We'll talk about it in more detail, but there were 3 sites. There was a main physical event in Minneapolis, a site in Basel, Switzerland, a site in Dallas, Texas, and then there were a bunch of people online. So one of the things that we learned in that event is that this is really this trend right here, and it's not that we learned it, but we applied it, is that we designed the hybrid experience for each audience. So I've just outlined that we had 4 audiences and we designed for those. So, and please accept my apologies. I'm a simple guy with circles and kind of drawing skills, rudimentary drawing skills. So the hub, the hub in the middle is the face-to-face event. So we wanted to keep that central. So we have a lot of different types of content and things that we're doing for that event. But then the second ring, the second audience that we're looking at, which is a different type of event experience, were the satellites. And so we had 2 satellites, so we wanted to look at those very closely. Then we also had people that were watching through an online webcasting solution. So we wanted to look at that experience because that's going to be significantly different than those other experiences. Not only did we have time zone issues, but then we had space and what are they doing in those spaces. And finally, we believed that you could have a strategy and try to appeal to people using social media and use a content distribution with social media. And we'll talk about that a little later. So what did we do? So we ended up with 75 people on site and 15 people in the Switzerland pod and 10 in the Dallas pod. And then that's 550 people that were online, that were participating online. Another one, so that kind of gives you an overall thing. But what we did with those 4 audiences, if I just take a step back, so we had 4 audiences there. What we did with those 4 audiences is we designed programming and content specific for those audiences. And so if I try the laser pointer here, we designed these books, which were the program books, for all 3 physical space audiences with the proper time in them. So we didn't print them and send them to Switzerland. We sent them an electronic copy with the times matched accordingly, and then they could print them themselves. And then for the online audience, we developed a custom program for them. Now, I don't mean we just took the program and we just reprinted it in 4 different ways. What I mean is we had specific content. So for example, Switzerland was 7 hours ahead of where we were in Minneapolis. So when we went to lunch at noon, they went to dinner at 7 p.m., right? So they had organized a dinner there, and their dinner included wine. Ours included, not wine. So, your basic conference food. But we felt that kind of thing was important because those local people, they needed to work together, they needed to kind of bond together, and they needed to have their own intimate experience. The people online, we had a program that was online right here. We also developed content for when we went into breaks. So, between sessions you go and have a coffee break or whatever. We didn't want the online people to evaporate and go do something else. Because after 2 hours of content, we designed it so they have 2 hours of content, and kind of a half an hour break, 2 hours of content, and then some more, lunch or whatever. And so what we expected is that people might plug in for 2 hours and say, hey, I'll spend 2 hours here, and then I'm going to go to my meetings, whatever. But we wanted to try to hook them by designing these specific content elements, and I'll talk more about some of the specific things we did, that would hold them over almost and bridge them into the next session, right? And the feedback we got is that they loved it because it was special just for them, and it was a 2-way dialogue where they could ask questions, they could comment, and then their input was being discussed right there in that special content, those special programs. But the bigger thing is that we were able to bridge the attendees, and later on, some of the feedback we got was, hey, I wish we would have had more time to get lunch or go to the bathroom. And we thought, you're at home. You can go whenever you want. But the people were really locked into, or really engaged, and really, they didn't want to leave because they were so excited about what's coming, even though we had outlined specifically what was coming and we're sticking to the schedule. But so I think it's important for you to take home, for those of you that haven't done this before, think about each of your audiences and make sure you design a specific program for them, and you want to mix in with when you have them integrate together through this, whether they're viewing a webcast or they're working on some projects or whatever you've got them doing, but also have some things locally where they have maybe a local speaker or some local engagement activities so they have their own event experience on their own. Michelle.
On Twitter, they're asking, allowing satellite locations to see each other and interact presents huge possible technical problems. How important is that?
I have some pictures of that. The answer to that is it's true. And it can be complex to put together, but you can also design it so that in our case, and I have some photos that I'll show you a little later, but we had video cameras that were projecting the room like this, and then we also had screens that were showing what each of those audiences were, so we could see those audiences, so they could all see each other. And then also we had it set up so that we could drop the audio and the video feed on the live screen, on the house sound, and then push it out on the webcast. When you set that, it is a technical challenge, but you can design that and set it up so that your risk points during the event are very manageable.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So it's just like a physical event. You got to think about backup, what if. I mean, if you think you're going to do an event and just have one T1 line in a room and say, oh, it's not going to go down. You got to know, what's my tier 1, what's my tier 2, what's the worst case scenario. So if you're streaming video and audio and slides to a location, What's the next best thing? Audio and slides. And then if the internet goes down totally, make sure there's a Polycom in the room and that you have speakers. Because if you have a group of people together, they got to have a program. You can't say, here's your dinner, sorry, there's no presentation. Even though it might not be the ideal way to get it, you got to think of a backup. Just like a physical meeting, you would never not have a backup plan.
And I just want to add to that. I think Ben's right on. The other thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have multiple layers of communication between those different sites, because your primary method might fail for reasons that are, even though you might have tested and everything worked fine, we had a group that was working in a wine cellar, okay? So the phone worked fine, but once there was 400 people above them, all of a sudden their mobile phone service, so when we wanted to reach them, we had to go to that second and third tier of backup.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing on that. I think it depends on how you want them to engage between those satellite experiences, right? I mean, if it's back channel chat, that produces a lot less intrinsic issues than if you're actually trying to have them have verbal communications, because you could deal with stream delay, et cetera, and that might be where you opt to have a phone bridge that's connecting those two rooms as opposed to relying on the streaming for them to be able to communicate directly.
And never do technology for technology's sake. Just because the technology's there doesn't mean you have to use it.
Exactly. So the next thing that we did...
Hey, Sam, can I ask you one question about before? Do you think the web audience can handle an event the same length as a physical audience? Like, do you think they can sit through, 90 minutes? Do you think there's a time length that is ideal for the web audience that's different than physical?
I think that the shorter the better. So let me just be real clear about that. I think it's got to be really short. I think some of the data says that what they say, usually a maximum of 2 hours, which is why we chunked it in 2-hour blocks. Right. We didn't think they were going to stick around. But what we'll get to is in Trend 6 are some of the engagement things that we did, Ben, to really keep them, because that's what I think was really the key at the end of the day in terms of keeping those people there all day.
And to add to that, I think it also depends on the audience. Yes. Right, who is the audience type? So with like a Cisco Live Virtual, those individuals are going there for technical training. Right. You don't deliver a technical training session in 30 minutes. So those individuals will hang out 4 to 6 hours because they're going to get a 90-minute deep dive technical, training session after, post a keynote with an executive chat wrapped in between the two. So I think it depends on the audience.
And a C-level audience might not, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, I know there are some sessions that actually do deep dives into how to figure that stuff out. So you should check out some of those sessions if you're interested. All right, so the next thing we wanted to do is we believe that a lot of hybrid events are like bad public access TV, okay? That was kind of a premise we had, and we said, well, what's a good example? And so what we did is we said, well, let's look at live TV, right? You've got sports, you've got these kind of political debate examples, right? And so they always start with kind of see if we have a picture. They have a studio, and they have they have a host or hostess, and they kind of introduce the event. They help the people at home kind of keep engaged with some of the side storylines, those kinds of things. And then on top of that, they also do some additional analysis during the event. And so we wanted to really mimic that process to the best of our ability. So that was one of our objectives here. So we had Emily Barta come in, and we built a studio we were using a one-room plenary session model. We built a studio in the back. It was right there in the same room. And so then we had her that would introduce all the sessions, and we didn't have her mic on the house sound. We had it on a special separate network so that she was basically quiet and wouldn't disrupt anyone while she was talking on in the studio. But then she could introduce things, and we could cut to her during group activities. So while we had attendees doing group activities, we would cut to Emily so that the remote audience had a different kind of experience and could talk to Emily. So she was like she was their hostess, but she was their personal concierge and their friend throughout this entire event. And that we got a lot of very, very positive feedback about that process. But so then she created a connection. Now what you also, you won't see this here, but we had the studio set up so it had two different looks. It had a look so that it was more like like you have in this photo here where she's at her desk, but we also set it up so that it could be like a red carpet. So we would bring through attendees after sessions and say, what did you think? Bring through speakers and get them to talk about the experience they just had. So they were able to give their own personal reflections, talk to the people that were not in the room. And here's an example of that. This is one of our speakers who was being interviewed. The people were sending in questions. We were using Twitter as our back channel communication. People were sending questions in via Twitter. It was in the program, said, hey, here's where you tweet to, and the program was always updated right below the video. And then they could ask questions, and she would just pull the questions right off of Twitter. Actually, she had an assistant that was doing that, pull the questions, feed her the questions right off of Twitter, so then she could ask that speaker right there, right then and there. Which leads to the last trend, and this is the most important thing that I think if you're going to, from our experience in terms of the hybrid, is you need to turn, we believe that if you want to keep them online and keep them engaged, you want to turn the remote attendees into active participants. And let me talk about some of the things that we did to do that. This was one I will describe to you as a surprise. We used a remote presenter. We had one of the presenters in Switzerland. You can see he's in a wine cellar here. He was presenting to the audience online. It turns out that the people in that pod loved that idea. They liked that they were engaged enough that there was even going to be a presenter from their local group that was going to be able to talk to the rest of the audience. What I would like to point out to everyone, if I can, is this screen right here. That is the live view into the room. So the speaker, as he was giving his presentation, not only could he see his slides, they were technically projected behind him, but then he could look right into the audience, into the room. So it's not like he was talking to a camera or anything like that. Mm-hmm. He was talking to people. And this particular speaker is very animated and also is 20 times better when he can talk to people. So we were able to put him in an environment where it was the best thing for him. But what the key thing for you to take home is we were surprised at the feedback, the strong positive feedback that the attendees gave for that. The other thing that we did is here's a picture of the screens that were showing the people in their different rooms. Something I want you to know, if you look here, this is the webcast feed. So we had two different types of feeds that were going. The webcast was showing video and slides, and then we also had this live connection between them. There was a 20-second delay here. Mm-hmm. So we knew there was a delay. You have to manage for that if you're going to use that. But we wanted these guys to have the best possible experience, and we decided that if we were going to project the room to them, we didn't have the money to invest in having a whole bunch of equipment to project, to show them the video and the slides. But the other thing we got here is with this platform that we used, they were able to then resize and decide how they wanted it to look. And so then that gave them a very rich experience on its own. But there was a delay. So when we did want to go to the pods, we just would make sure that we would tell them, hey, we're going to be coming to you in a minute. So then they would get prepared. There was a cue for them to turn in front of this camera and then be ready with whatever group response they were supposed to give or whatever they're supposed to do. We also used business games. This was quite an interesting activity. We did a 60-minute activity where we went through this collaborative business game. The idea was to get people to collaborate together and work together. So we wanted to bring all 600 people together to work on a project, right, to solve this problem. And the way we designed that, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but some of you weren't here, we had when it was time for the individuals to make their decisions and vote on their response, they could do that online. And we had a polling service that helped all the remote sites. They could use it as well as the attendees online. Same system, same solution. But then when it came time for group discussion and then a group decision, we assigned table numbers to each table. So we had the group in round table or in oval tables, and and then we also had people on couches, and they were a group too. But each group was assigned. But then in the virtual audience, each satellite was one group, and the 550 people online were also another group. And so then that Emily Barter role came back into play. She would then talk to them, figure out what they thought about the decisions, and then when the presenter here would go around and say, okay, what's your decision? We need to know, because we had to come to a consensus as a group. He would get each of the small groups to give a decision, and then we would roll that up, to aggregate that to a final group decision. And it was really nice for Emily to stand there, or even the satellite groups to come on and say, look, we believe this. And they didn't all agree. And it was designed that way, but so that it was fun for them to come on and give their opinion, and then to make sure that everyone could see that as a group. All right? So that was one thing. Another thing that we did is we really wanted them to build something together. right? So we had 650 people. We wanted them to collaborate on a project. So we gave them a problem. And this particular group was event people. So we gave them the problem of how do we do post-event, right? And if you ask people, you know, what are some best practices or what should we be doing post-event, they'll give you 5 or 6 things. But what we also did is we used that group system again, and we said we gave each table and the online audience and each pod a different topic, okay? So they each had a different piece to the puzzle. So they could talk about that, brainstorm it. We used Google Moderator for them to plug in all of their ideas, vote on them, right? So they could vote on their ideas. And then at the end of the session, we went around to each group and said, you know, what did you guys decide are the top 3 things that we should be including here? So at the end of that session, at the end of that 75 or 60 or 75 minutes, we created a document that basically everyone had built together. We had this online living document that had over 100 ideas in it, and it had 300 different votes for the different ideas. So some ideas were entered, but no one cared. But so they had something to take home with them right there after the event. So that was another piece where we took those 650 people and allowed them to work together. I talked about input from the locations. This happens to be the only picture that I have, but this is Basel. We talked about technical difficulties, Michelle. They didn't have lights part of the time, but they had power for their computers and power for the network. That was great, but we would get them to give input whenever it was necessary. We also used, I mentioned this before, with the virtual MC, and in this particular case, this is the group project. We brought in the person who was leading the session. She came in and then would talk to the remote audience, so they had specific questions and made sure that they were comfortable. So, all right.
Questions?
Yeah, that remote presenter setup, there's chatter on Twitter about how complex that is for a remote speaker. How tech savvy do they need to be with 4 laptops or 4 screens in front of them? I mean, there's a lot going on there. And second of all, the ultimate question here, why should somebody come to the physical event if there's a free virtual event with the same content?
Let's take the first one about the laptop first, and then we'll address the other one. So with the technology setup, you don't have to have it that complex. They had in our model, the satellites were responsible for their own setup, and we had agreed on, we had built run schedules for them, so they knew when we were going to come to them. They didn't know exactly when, but they knew in what sessions, and they knew how many times we were going to go to them. We had designed all of that. They also knew, we had also decided what they were going to be able to do. We had the technology in place for them to be able to see the speaker, but they chose to add those 4 laptops. They chose to
it
do
added
it
elements of UA, you know, so it looked like a little more than just, all you really need is one computer, video and audio going into that computer, however you get it to go, and that's all you need. Everything else is eye candy or extras.
Yep. And so that's the minimum requirement,
Right.
and you can go up from there and change that experience.
Doesn't make for a great photo opportunity to have one computer.
And it
Correct.
also, as I think you mentioned earlier, that speaker specifically did much better when he felt he could or was engaging with an actual audience as opposed to presenting in front of a camera. Presenting in front of a camera and knowing there are people behind it can sometimes be a little bit off-putting for someone who does want to do that eye connection, or at least from that view he could see, are they nodding off? Are they still sitting up in their seat? Are there people shaking their head? I mean, he could get some of those, visual body clues, if you will, on how engaged that audience was with what he was saying.
And it is an art form, trying to learn how to talk to a virtual audience when you're used to
is.
talking to people in front of you.
And that's another thing we had to do with all of our speakers. We needed to give them a little bit of training, some more than others, about how their session needed to go, how they should engage, when. Some people wanted to do it all the time, but it also takes time to go to the remote audience, and it takes time out of your session. But you can design this, and you can make sure that everyone gets their. If you have a good communication design process, you can design it, and it can look natural and integrated, but also creates a rich experience for everyone.
Does anyone have any other questions?
No, there was another question there about cannibalizing, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Okay.
I think cannibalizing is like the big fear. If I have this virtual extension, is it somehow going to start poaching on my physical event audience? I think in the session prior to this, they were talking about, 80% of the people say that they would prefer a face-to-face experience. It was earlier in Michael's keynote or in the plenary session, and 20% say they prefer a virtual. of any time you have a known audience base, there are maybe 50% of that target audience who actually are able to attend, and the other 30 or 40 wanted to, but it's not their turn, it's not their time. So I don't think that if they want to attend a physical event, they are going to attend that physical event. I don't think virtual cannibalizes, and we've seen that with statistics we have from Cisco Live experience. It actually builds awareness and drives future attendance to the physical activity.
I think
it grows
dead
the
on,
overall
it grows
audience.
your business.
We used, in this particular event example, we had used social media. Part of our social media marketing was to just to get it out, spread it as far and wide to like-minded people. We were focused on like-minded people. And so there was a woman who came into the session, or came into the stream, signed up, whatever, and she said, my intent was to kind of check in, see that it was terrible, and then leave, and then, but then say I had been there. And so I thought, check it out. I ended up staying, in her comment to us, and she wrote us a long letter. She said, I ended up staying for 6 hours. If I would have had to pay for it, I would have, no problem. Mm-hmm. And then she decided to attend the next event. Mm-hmm. So she then paid for the next, and not only did she pay, but she signed up to be a speaker at the next event. So this is someone who just was casually bypassing, found valuable content, found like-minded people, and
but
then
I think that's why your
translated.
program has to be good.
Yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
can work the reverse too. If I watch something on the web and it's a really bad user experience, there's no way I want to go to that conference next time. But if it's really good, I'm going, no, I want to be there next
That's right.
year.
That's a great
Yeah, and
point.
we've done this year over year with that Cisco Live experience, and each year we see very similar stats coming out. Of that physical event of audience, it's over 90% say they want to attend physically the next year. For those who say that they are not, it's because it's not their turn to travel, or there might be some budget constraints, and so they'll opt to do virtual. For that virtual only audience, it's 55 to 65% are new timers. They've never been to a Cisco Live experience before. This is their first taste, and anywhere from 37 to 45% of them say, now I want to go to a physical event. And we, from a cost perspective, with Cisco Live, we offer tiers of access, if you will. From a virtual experience, there's that Ustream audience is totally unqualified. They're going to get very, very limited content, and it's going to be, kind of a one-time shot for them. Then there's a guest access level within the actual virtual platform that gets them that same kind of broadcast that you saw with the Ustream audience, access to sponsors who are inside of their partners and sponsors, and some limited sampling of the technical training that is available. We then have an a la carte session option so that they can purchase individual technical training classes if they want. Then there's the buy the whole virtual package, and that gets, $395. You get hundreds of sessions available on demand. By doing that, the next year you can get $200 off of your physical event experience the following year. So it very much is a funnel and an awareness builder for your overall event experience, and it leads to a larger audience and a better use of the infrastructure you're putting in place. So.
Are there any other questions? If not, I think we're going over our time, so we could take one more.
Yeah, it's about how pricing the virtual, attendance. And I'm just wondering also if the dynamic changes when the virtual attendee is paying versus not paying. Do they demand more if they're paying for it? Do you feel obligated to deliver more?
From a pay perspective with Cisco Live, we definitely want to continue to build that catalog. And that's not just for those e-commerce individuals for the virtual option. That's for that physical event registrant. It is part and parcel of their physical event attendance that they get access to this catalog. I said there's 400 sessions being presented on site there. They're there for a 3-day event. They have only so many slots of times they can actually take a technical session when they're at that physical experience, so that virtual extension allows them to continue that learning and that training experience throughout the year. We then also really started to feel like we needed to give more value add in our off-cycle activities. So Cisco Live is a hybrid extension for all of the global Cisco Live events. There is the US event, the London event, the Australia-New Zealand event, the APAC event, and then the Middle East event, the Bahrain event. All of those are robust hybrid experiences. In between those, we do what we call our Ask the Experts series, where at least a monthly basis and at different time zones, an hour-long session is held on a highly technical subject that continues to bring them into the environment. We capture out new session material at each of those global events, so we're constantly adding to that catalog throughout the year. So yeah, I do think you need to have a commitment to not just the people who pay for that virtual experience, but those people who are getting it as part of their physical event package.
Well, and I think one of the, I mean, I loved what you just said, but to our bigger messages here, you really have to have a good strategy behind all of this and not just say, let's just do it. And
No,
so
no,
I
no,
think that's a
definitely.
wonderful
I mean, none
example.
of that was done because we rolled the dice and said, yeah, I think we're going to capture some sessions over here. There was a lot of thought process that went into whether we have a one-off experience or a 365 environment and how we were going to structure that, yeah.
So for all the panelists, we want to thank you very much for sitting through our session. And I know you know how to get in touch with everyone on the panel. Thank you. Have a great
Thank
rest
you.
of the show.